Yesterday we were contrasting Antioch and Alexandria. And they do kind of represent two different ways of thinking about the Christian faith and, really two different philosophical outlooks. So, if we ask the question, what's the emphasis, Spencer, in the Christology flowing out of Antioch? Your answer would be, the emphasis is on
the Jewish Christianity.
Okay, it's the Christology flowing out of Antioch. The emphasis would be on the view of Christ, would be, going once, twice, Sydney.
Emphasis on the deity.
This is Antioch, the Jewish side. So it would be, go ahead. The humanity. It's the humanity of Christ. The Jewish side out of Antioch believed that Christ was the Jewish Messiah. They didn't think he was God, but they did think he was a powerfully anointed man. And they actually subscribed in many cases to the virgin birth. They didn't have a problem with that. That still is the humanity of Christ, even though it's a perfect humanity. In Alexandria, the emphasis is on, I'm not going to quite say the deity of Christ, because that implies equality with God. I'm going to say the divinity of Christ, because even they don't quite get there, but they head in that direction. In Antioch, salvation looks like what? What does salvation look like if you are an Antiochian Christian? Sydney?
They believe that Christ's death had somewhat of atoning power, but that good works are necessary.
All right, you've answered well a slightly different question, but I'm going to go with your answer. My question was, what does salvation look like? You answered the question, how is salvation achieved? And that was a question I wanted to ask, so I'm just going to ask it right now. And you've given a good answer. Salvation is achieved basically in the Antiochian outlook by some form of good works. It is a works-based approach to salvation. And that's very much like, of course, what Jesus himself dealt with when he's, dealing with the religious leaders, the Jewish leaders, the Pharisees especially, but certainly others besides them in the Jewish economy. They placed a heavy emphasis on virtue. Salvation is by, keeping the law, that sort of thing. This continues. So Antioch still has that strong kind of emphasis going on. How do you suppose salvation is achieved in the Alexandrian approach, which is more Greek? Any ideas? How would salvation be achieved there? I didn't talk about this. I'm asking you to extrapolate. I want you to kind of think beyond the implications of what we were saying. How would salvation be achieved in this more Hellenistic setting? Sydney, go ahead.
Well, I remember one of Tertullian's warnings against philosophy in the Christian outlook is that it's not so much salvation by faith, but achieved by knowledge of the Scriptures. Okay,
that's the idea. Then you were going to say something, and then you retracted it. And that's that. You're going in the right direction. Anybody? In Antioch, you're saved by good works. In Alexandria, you're saved by, you give it in one word, and you said it. What would be the word?
Knowledge.
Knowledge. Hence, Gnostic, which is simply the Greek word for knowledge. Gnosis, to know, or knowledge. Gnosko, to know, so on. Gnosticism stands for the idea that you're not saved so much by what you do, you're saved more by what you know. And oftentimes the knowledge is acquired not by going to a school where you get brilliant lectures, and take notes and pass tests. I'm not talking about myself, of course. You understand. I mean other teachers here. But that's one kind of knowledge, but the kind of knowledge the Gnostics had in mind and this Hellenistic influence in general had in mind was more a knowledge you would call mystical knowledge. A knowledge that comes through some sort of mystical experience where you kind of transcend ordinary human experience and you have a confrontation or a connection or engage with the great cosmic reality. Sort of taking Plato and just making almost a religion out of his idea of the ideal world, where you go up there and you kind of experience it. Okay? What does salvation look like? Now, this is the question that I asked originally, and Sydney gave a good answer to a different question, so now I'm back to my original question. What does salvation look like from an Antiochian point of view? What is the ideal state? The salvific condition for somebody in Antioch? These are not easy questions. I'm just wanting you to kind of push the implications. Any thoughts, Jacob? What do you think the ideal condition of salvation looks like?
Well, since they emphasize the divinity of God and this kind of...
We're in Antioch here.
Oh, we're in Antioch?
Yeah, sorry.
Oh.
What is a little... Maybe I misspoke. I may have misspoken. I mean, what is the ideal condition looks like in Antioch? Kind of like the as good as it gets to the Antiochian outlook would be what?
I'm not really sure.
Okay, anybody want to... It's not an easy question, but I alluded to it yesterday, yeah.
Would it be just doing your best to live like God did, like Christ did?
But I'm talking about salvation. I mean, what do you achieve as a result of that arduous life of doing right things? What you achieve, what you get, the light at the end of the tunnel is what?
Well, this isn't really personal salvation. We talked yesterday about Jerusalem and like going back and creating the new Jerusalem.
All right, that's what it looks very much like. It's a this worldly, a kind of earthly, sort of ideal world, what some people call the millennium. You know, a perfect world. Jesus is reigning. Everybody's doing what's right. Everybody's living in this kind of paradisical situation, but it's this world. It's right here on earth. That's kind of what they had in mind. That's what I meant yesterday by a premillennial eschatology. Their eschatology looks very much like kind of, we finally get there. You know, everybody we elect for president promises to get us there, right? Vote for me, I'll bring in the millennium. They all are saying that in some way or other. You listen carefully. They don't say it quite in those words, but that's the idea. Vote for me, I'll give you the millennium. You know, so far none have, but maybe somebody will. That was their expectation. The Messiah is going to bring in this earthly kind of wonderful circumstance of ideal life, whereas in Alexandria, salvation is otherworldly. So if I could, sorry to do this to you, but don't erase earthly, but the term I want to really use here is this worldly. And over here it's otherworldly. In the Greek understanding, you escape from this world. Salvation doesn't happen here in this world. You know, Socrates drinks the hemlock, and he's going to a better place. Don't weep for me. I'm out of here. I'm off the wheel. I'm going to the wonderful, consummation of reality, which isn't here at all. And so for him, it's salvation from this world, whereas for the Antiochian view, it's salvation in this world. Okay? How about on their view of God? What's the fundamental outlook, Krista, with respect to the nature of God if you're an Antiochian Christian?
The
nature of God? There's just one God.
There's one God, and we called it yesterday. I gave it a special.
The evidence for hard monotheists.
There you go. So that's what you tend to find here. You find a hard monotheism. God is one discrete being. He is radically different from us. He is to be worshipped. He is, in a sense, at a distance. There's no bridge by which we reach Him or He reaches us. We just worship Him from afar. It's kind of the Islamic idea. To some degree, the Jewish idea. From the Greek point of view, what does God look like? It's really just the opposite. What would be the flavor of a Greek view of God? Sorry.
He would be a lot like us, just more powerful.
All right, sort of. Sort of. A lot like us, but more powerful. I would have to put it a little bit differently, but that's going in the right direction. To the Greeks, in a sense, we are all in God, and God is in us. It moves in the direction of a kind of pantheism. God is very close to us. That's why this mystical sort of emphasis shows up, because your mystical experience is really reaching and somehow contacting the God who is somehow residing within you. A little bit like the Stoics, you know. A spark of the divine. So God is close to us. It heads toward pantheism. I don't want to say it is pantheism, that's too strong, but it heads in that direction. God is not this discrete being way out there, but God is rather a being that's right here. Now, what I'm trying to give you here is not simply a way of distinguishing Antioch from Alexandria, but I want you to understand that down through the history of religious thought, you're going to find basically these two outlooks. You know, it's just there. In the world of, say, offbeat religious movements today, you can put them in one of two categories. For example, if I said, how about the religion, the Jehovah's Witnesses? Do they head more in the direction of Antioch or in the direction of Alexandria? The Jehovah's Witnesses. From what you know about them, where would you put them? Would they be more, you say, that's right, Josiah?
More Antioch.
That's right. And why would you say that?
Because they deny the divinity of Christ.
They do that?
And I think they're more monotheistic.
They're more monotheistic, hard monotheism, no Trinity. What else?
And I think they definitely advocate the right build of good works.
Good works by salvation, exactly. What else?
I guess the last one. I guess their idea of salvation is that it's going to be of this world.
That's right. That's right.
Everything's gonna change.
These people are on all fours with it. You have a Jehovah's Witness come to your door. First thing they're going to hand you is a little tract. It's got a little picture on the front. And have you ever seen these? It shows this wonderful mom and a dad and little kids, and there's a nice little fuzzy lion over here and a giraffe over there, and birds are flying in the air, and you think, is this the San Diego Zoo? What is this? How come that lion isn't crunching up that little child? And the reason it's not happening that way is because you're in paradise. And that's what Jehovah's Witnesses are looking forward to, is salvation, which is very this worldly. It is absolutely this. And there's a bunch of others out there like it. But now if I said to you, how about Christian Science? There's a different, unorthodox religious. How many know anything about Christian Science? Do you? Where would you put them? It's kind of an easy question now, but what do you know about them? Christian Science, Mary Baker Eddy is the founder of it back in the early 1800s. And why would she represent a more Alexandrian kind of outlook?
The picture is just very otherworldly, definitely aliens and all of that good stuff. I don't know totally. I've heard a mixture of stuff. But
Are you talking about Scientology or Christian
I might have
Science?
flipped over to Scientology.
See, L. Ron Hubbard founded Scientology. It also.
Oh, okay.
Well, let me put it this way. In terms of orthodoxy, Scientology makes Mary Baker Eddy look like John Calvin. I mean, you know, if this is where we are with Christian Science, then Scientology is actually outside the window, you know, about 40 yards down the parking lot. But you're right, it goes in that direction. But Christian Science, anybody ever studied Christian Science or anything about it? You know, Christian Science, it's mind over matter. Mind is what, you know, it's healing by positive thinking. Your body is less real than your soul. It's very Platonic. It's pure Gnosticism. Mary Baker Eddy was a Gnostic. All she did was warm over a heresy that the church disposed of in the 2nd and 3rd century, reinvented it, and sold it to the American public in the late 1800s, and voila, we have a wonderful cult. But it goes in this direction. It goes in the Alexandrian direction. All I'm saying is, you know, virtually every religious scheme out there has to go one way or the other. My own view is that Orthodox Christianity is delicately balanced. It affirms both the deity and the humanity of Christ. It says God is both transcendent and immanent. It says that salvation is a matter of knowing something, but it will translate into good works in your life. You see, Orthodox Christianity kind of walks this tightrope down the middle between these two. But you fall off the rope either way, you fall into heresy land. And you can pick your heresy, but it's going to have some of those same themes going on. Does that make sense what I'm saying to you? This will be helpful to you. You know, learn this. This will help you, my children, if you'll kind of think in these terms. Because when you start talking to people who have some brand new, wonderful, big deal religious insight, and they want to say, oh, it's brand new, it's you never like this. You say, well, no, actually, it's not new. You know, the church was dealing with that, 1,400 years ago, and here's what the church said then, and I'm saying the same thing today. How about New Age religion? That's kind of big these days. Where would you put that? New Age religion would be Sydney?
I think I would put it Alexandrian.
Sure, absolutely. It'd be way over here in this kind of, New Age is just kind of neo-Gnosticism as well. Yeah.
Where would Mormonism go?
Mormonism would be more here. Mormonism's trickier because they have an idea that you are gradually deified. But that's eventually where Antioch wound up. The heresy there called adoptionism, which we will get to soon, maybe today, actually just takes the next step. Christ starts out perfect human, but then God gradually exalts him. But his exaltation is still a great exaltation of a human, so he becomes a kind of deity of sorts. A God with a small g sort of idea. But nothing like this, nothing like the mysticism that we find over here. All right. Well, with that little, hopefully that kind of helps. Let's go back to think about Antioch. I gave you the Ebionites, the Alagoi, and now I want to give you some names. So this is a little bit of church history, but hopefully a little help. But the first name that comes along is a guy by the name of Paul of Samosata. Paul of, I left out the of there, Samosata, S-A-M-O-S-A-T-A. If I had the nifty map that I used to have when you guys were in Bible context, I could point to Antioch on the map. In fact, you recall I drew it yesterday. Remember, here's Jerusalem, here's Antioch. You with me? Samosata is right about here. So Samosata is about 20 miles from Antioch. It's a little suburb of Antioch. But Paul of Samosata, who is a figure that shows up in the 3rd century, that's the 200s, is the bishop. He is the leader of the church, the Christian church in Antioch. Now, I want you to get that in your heads. He is the leader of the church in Antioch, but his theology is just radically heretical. So this is kind of, the problem is at this time, orthodoxy had not been well defined yet. Paul of Samosata rejected the notion of Trinity. The Trinity, he said, is heresy. The Trinity represents an intrusion of Greek distortions into the Christian faith. So the leader of the church in Antioch in the 3rd century AD denied the Trinity. Okay? He was opposed to the use of the term logos. He said that represented an intrusion of Greek thought. He rejected the first, 14 verses, or 18 verses, I think, of John's Gospel, sometimes called the prologue. In the beginning was the Word was with God, all of that. He rejects all of that. He accepts John's Gospel, but says the first 18 verses were added later by a Greek. So get rid of that. He's the first higher critic. Get rid of those, parts of the Bible that don't. Paul of Samosata is the first guy who clearly gave us something called adoptionism. Now, I want to think that we went over this when we dealt with Christology, didn't we? So is this kind of ringing bells? And I think I may have said at the time we'll come back to this in philosophy and look at it again. So hopefully this is not brand new to you. So with that little precursor to the question, what in the world is adoptionism? Stephen?
Adoptionism is the idea that Jesus was just a regular human, and that
I wouldn't say regular, but yeah, he was human.
He was born just like any other human, and God adopted him and claimed him as his own son.
Okay,
after his birth, I think.
After his birth, at what precise moment was he adopted?
I think at his baptism.
That's right. Okay. So adoptionism is the general idea that Jesus, now I wouldn't say a regular human, but I think what you mean is he was truly human. He wasn't part God, part man, or anything like that. He was a human being. Paul of Samosata did affirm the virgin birth. He believed that Jesus was born of a virgin. That didn't make him God. It just made him a man not touched by sin, according to Paul of Samosata. He lived a sinless life, but when Jesus arrived at the Jordan River and was baptized by John the Baptist, an extraordinary thing happened. Namely, God adopted Christ. You are my son. In you I am well pleased. You see, that's the announcement of heaven when Jesus is baptized. And that adoption begins a process by which Jesus is gradually elevated to become something like a God. The change is powerful and dynamic, and thus it gives rise to a heresy that's been called traditionally what? This is in your notes from somewhere. And the name of the heresy is, it's two words, and it's the idea that God powerfully raises Christ into ever increasing higher levels of dignity and glory and so on, and the heresy is called, no takers? Matthew, don't remember this? No? Its initials are D-M. Josiah, you pull this out? No? Spencer?
Is the M monism?
No.
Okay.
Good thought. You're right. Actually, the first three letters would be correct. All right, here it is. Anybody? Dynamic monarchianism. This again is something like the Jehovah's Witnesses. You may know that the Jehovah's Witnesses, you know, I don't know if you've ever been over this, but Jehovah's Witness comes to your door, knock, knock, knock. You ask them the question, well, wait a minute, do you guys not believe that Jesus is God? Well, no, we believe that Jesus is God, but not quite the way you do. You say, well, what's the matter with you? Look at John chapter 1. In the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God. What part of that don't you get? You know, you say to your Jehovah's Witness, you say it charitably, of course. And they say, oh, well, you see, that's not being translated right. Does anyone know how they would translate that? They would say, yeah, do you know?
Does it say, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was a God?
That's right. That's right. So a Jehovah's Witness would say, it should be translated, a God. In the beginning was the Word was with God. The Word was a God. Now I'm going to tell you, in the Greek language, there is no indefinite article. There is no word for which we have in English. And so that is actually marginally permissible as a translation. It's not permissible at all as an interpretation of the text. It's clearly not what John is saying. But they have at least one little weak leg to stand on there when they're making that case. And if you happen to know a little Greek, you can help them understand it better. But anyway, that's the idea. It's a form of dynamic monarchianism. You know, it's just called Jehovah's Witnesses. Was that you, Ben?
Yeah.
No, that was okay.
So they believe that Christ was always with God even in the beginning, but how does that exactly translate? Because
You as Jehovah's Witnesses?
yeah,
They really believe that Jesus originally was an angel, and that he, at the resurrection, returned to an even higher status as an angel. That's kind of their view of it. It's fairly complicated and a little strange, but that's the idea. Joe?
Well, you said for the people in Antioch, the Jewish people
Yeah.
rejected Christ's divinity.
Yes.
But adoptionism, you say at Christ's baptism they believe that Christ receives some kind of...
They would say that he never ceases to be man, but he becomes a highly exalted man, so that it becomes eventually permissible to call him as if he were a god. But they still are really more focused on his humanity. So it's like greatly exalted humanity is the way you think about it. Whereas over here, humanity is denied. Jesus is not human. He's kind of a spirit. You know, that's the difference. Yeah.
So how would like adoptionists or dynamic monists use the crucifixion? Would they say why would they need to do that? I mean, if he's becoming
Right.
more and more like
Right.
God, why would God turn his back on him?
Yeah. There were various views of the meaning of the crucifixion, but for the most part, they had this notion that Jesus gives himself in the great supreme act of self-sacrifice, and that may have some atoning effect, but really one of the greatest effects is it becomes a paradigm by which you can also follow in the same path of self-sacrifice. Jesus becomes something like an example of the most extraordinary good work, and we should all follow in works that are also self-sacrificing good works. It becomes an example theory of the atonement in some ways.
So then how, I mean, Christ's crucifixion for us it atones for our sins.
Right.
But what, does that atone for their sins too, or do they believe in sin?
They believe that the atonement of Christ will apply to you, but only as you in good works really make it your own. You have to live a life of pretty robust, hard-working effort and virtue.
So do you have to work off your sin then?
That's one way it's conceived of. There's no one answer to this. You'll find different strands.
Okay.
Contemporary Judaism would take exactly the approach you just described. If I do a sinful thing, then I need to go and do a bunch of extra good works to compensate for it.
Okay.
You know, not all would take quite that view. It's not like there's one consistent party line here, but it all has to do with with the atonement of Christ really being conditioned on my life of good works. One way or another, that's what's involved.
Okay.
Yeah.
Was Jesus ever called Jehovah in the original Greek of the New Testament?
No, but then you never have the word Jehovah as such used in the New Testament, you know. The closest to it you get is Jesus using the ego eimi formula, I am. Before Abraham was, ego eimi. And that's virtually taken as comparable to Yahweh, but you don't have, you might say, that actual Hebrew word in the Greek. The unity that Christ says he has with the Father when he says, I and the Father are one, is a moral unity, not an ontological unity, not a substantive unity. It's a moral unity. Jesus is one with the Father at the point of their moral will or purpose. All right. That's Paul of Samosata. I want to jump over now and talk about what's happening in Alexandria. And again, repetition is the hallmark of education. You've heard most of this before. Slightly different context, but some of the same themes. The first guy that pops up that we're interested in Alexandria is a guy by the name of, oh boy, I'd be so impressed if anyone remembers this. He's the guy that said, I joked about it, I'm sure, and said, Jesus is a sunbeam. Did I use that? Does that ring a bell, Nicole? No, don't remember that. Okay, the guy's name is Sabellius. Does anybody remember the name Sabellius? Sort of. 3rd century, this is the 200s. He views or takes the view that Jesus is divinity, not humanity. And he approaches it based on a kind of modalistic view of God. We talked about this the other day with Philo, but it's found in much of the Greek thought of the time, so I'll just remind you of it. Here's God at the center of things, and God is just sort of emanating creation. Like the sun radiates light. God doesn't mean to do it. He's very much like Aristotle's God. He just does it by nature. God isn't thinking much about it. It's just kind of the way God is. The first level of emanation, the very closest to God, the highest level of being that flows out of God is called the, go ahead Spencer, that would be the Logos, right? And everything else flows from that. So you've got Logos, you've got angels, you've got man, you've got animals, you've got plants, you've got rocks, you've got nothing. That's the idea. So the further you get from God, the closer you get to unreality, nothingness. In this Greek idea, the further you get from God, the closer you get to evil. Hence, evil is ever increasing degrees of non-reality. That, by the way, could be taken as a quote straight out of the writings of Mary Baker Eddy, the Christian Science person. She says, evil is really just non-reality. And her great methodology for healing was to remember that, or think about the fact that if you are suffering from a disease, that disease is evil, it's not real, and your mind needs to, in a sense, rise above this ravaging disease, and you can heal yourself simply by the application of that which is more real. Mind over matter. Mind over disease, you know. And if you really want to do that right, you'll go visit a Christian Science reading room. You ever seen a Christian Science reading room? We got them around. There used to be one on Monroe, I think. I don't know if it's still there. Is it still there? If you're driving on North Monroe right about Garland, heading north, and you look to your left, you'll see Christian Science reading room. You been there?
I think it's still there.
Is it still? I think it is still there. I went in there once a few years ago. Very lovely elderly couple in there. I wanted to buy a copy of Mary Baker Eddy's book, Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures. They were very happy to sell me one. They had jillions of them. But the design, the purpose for the reading room is to go in and read. And you know why you read? Because you want knowledge. And the knowledge you're going to get is a knowledge which will give your mind the power it needs to overcome the diseases of the body. It's Gnosticism. That's why they have reading rooms, you know. Not that it's bad to read, I'm not saying that, but the philosophy behind them is really in the same direction. So anyway, that's their cosmology. That's the word you use. What's the cosmology of Antioch? It'll be a modalistic conception in which God is the highest reality at the center and He emanates being, and the further you get from God, the closer you get to nothingness. And so the task in the salvation of your soul is to engage in a process of going up through these levels through mystical disciplines till you encounter God. And they all kind of have something like that going on. This is why this particular view is at least subtly pantheistic. Why do you see pantheism in this cosmology? What about it is pantheistic? Avery?
Well, it looks like since man can just jump up levels like that, it can kind of, God is kind of in everything.
That's exactly right. That's it. Y'all see that? Every level is in some sense produced by God, and God is somehow in it. Like the sun shines, and when I walk outside and feel the rays of the sun hitting me, you might say in some sense, the light that's hitting me from the sun shares the same essence as the sun, doesn't it? It's coming straight from the sun, and I stand out there and absorb my vitamin D, and it's all coming from that great source of light in the sky. And that the further I get from the sun, the more attenuated is the light of the sun, and the more I move away from its influences and so on. And so our task is to try to get closer to this God who is the author of our being from an Alexandrian point of view. Y'all following this? Kind of see? This is very much in your world today. This is not ancient. This is contemporary. You'll find something like this even in New Age, some forms of New Age religion. Yeah.
So would they say that evil comes from God, or?
They would say that evil comes from the deprivation of the presence of God. So their idea is that as God is moved further away, evil comes in the vacuum that's created. Evil comes more from the side of nothingness than from the side of God. Now let me just say to you that that view, that evil is understood as the deprivation of the presence of God, has been extremely important in Christian history. And Augustine himself described evil as what he called privatio, privation, deprivation of God. So the notion that evil is somehow defined by the absence of God is really part of Christian teaching as well, with some modification. Yeah.
Wouldn't that mean that there is no evil then? Because what would they say the absence of God would be?
They say something very much like Mary Baker Eddy, that evil is actually the expression of that which is not real, and that you conquer it by virtue of your connection to that which is real. Classical Christianity has said, no, evil is real. It's not just nothing. It is something, but it is still something that depends on God for its definition. I mean, an atheist comes to you and says, well, if there's a God, how come there's evil in the world? My response is, unless there's a God, how could there be evil in the world? You realize if there's no God, there is no evil. It takes God to have evil. I always love it when an atheist asks me, well, you believe in God, then how come there's so much evil? How do you even know there is such a thing as evil unless you assume that there's a God? Otherwise, there's just amoeba. There's just ants. There's just molecules. There's just dust in the wind. But as soon as you attach the moral category of evil, you have just impliedly asserted the great category of God. So listen, Mr. Atheist, you're the guy with the problem here. You run around the world saying things are evil. You are being so theistic, you can't help it. Now, let's figure out what your problem is. I'm not the guy with the problem. You're the guy with the problem, Anyway, that really is, though, in some ways, related to this, that we couldn't even have evil but for God. So we in the Christian tradition have recognized that there's an element of truth to it. Evil is not an independent, equal, co-expansive force in competition with God. But for God, there is no evil. Now, evil's a problem. I'm not saying there's no problem there, but the point is that the very fact that we have a discussion about evil has to be predicated on the assumption that there is God. So we get past the atheistic problem right off the bat, and we start talking about, okay, how come this God has allowed evil in the world? We have that conversation. But it's no longer a conversation, is there a God? Because, like Dostoevsky said, if there is no God, all things are permissible. If there is no God, there are no rules, ultimately. There's no right, there's no wrong. There's no hell below us, above us only sky. Oh, that was John Lennon, actually. All right. Sibelius gave us a term. In Greek, it looks like this. Homoousia. Remember that? Remember that, Trevor? Homoousia? Good. What does it mean? Just think, it's only been a year. I think it's only been a year since you guys studied this stuff. It hasn't been that long. Not like Bible Context, which was 18 years ago. This is just fairly recent. Homoousia. There was a phrase given to us by Sibelius, who fully subscribed to all the stuff I've just described here. And he said, Christ is homoousia with the Father. And the meaning of that phrase is, Laura, do you remember? Homoousia?
Well, it meant with the same substance.
That's right. How come your hand wasn't in the air? Just, you gotta be brave. Get up there. That's right. So homoousia, same substance. And did the church ultimately like that phrase? Did the church ultimately say, yeah, Christ is homoousia with the Father? Is that an expression of orthodoxy? Answer? Krista, what do you think?
Yes.
Yes. And why is it? Why is that an orthodox, statement?
Because they're the same, they're the same person.
All right. So the fact that we use homoousia, does that mean we're all Sabellians? Nicole, what do you think? I mean, Sabellius gave us the term. No, Brad. What's the difference between Sabellianism and orthodoxy, even though we both use the same term, homoousia? We both use the same term. What's the difference?
Well, we believe that Christ was also fully human.
It's part of it, yeah. We believe homoousia in a Trinitarian sense. One essence, three persons. Sabellius meant it in a modalistic sense. God is radiating Logos, and that Logos is one with the Father in that emanation sense, So it's a quite different idea, but we still use the same language. Yeah.
Wouldn't that mean technically that we're also made of the same stuff? Because we're just, not as much though? Maybe,
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Christ is just higher, and that's part of the pantheism. We all have this kind of God in us, because we all are reflections of that emanation. Yeah, absolutely. Even rocks, but rocks have much less than man. Man has much less than angels. Angels have less than Logos, But yeah, we're all... And it was this sort of idea, we talked about this earlier with Philo, this was exactly what the writer to the Hebrews was trying to get rid of. He was trying to reject a similar sort of cosmology. And if you read chapter 1 of Hebrews, you'll see that really seems to be, what's behind his writing there. All right, so we've made it through Paul of Samosata, we've made it through Sabellius, and the place where we pick up next time out is with the chief student of Paul of Samosata, who's the guy that provoked the Nicene Council, and that guy's name is, what's the name of it's actually the next generation after Paul of Samosata, the man who most importantly provoked the Nicene Council in 325. It was the blank heresy, and it's called, his name is, anybody? Please help me, Krista?
Apollinarius?
No. Apollinarius is later. Anybody? Jacob? Remember this?
Do not.
You do not. All right. See, it's not wasting our time to go back over it, is it? Arius and Arianism. All right? Were you thinking that, Josiah? Why wasn't your hand in the air, my son? Okay, no, this was it. So we'll pick up with Arianism. Domani.